Hello, and welcome to a bonus box of Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
And this week we have a very special bonus box for you.
Indeed. Now, for those that remember last year, we covered the fall of Cadia and the 13th Black Crusade at the end of the year. Kind of like a grand hurrah before Terran 42's 2024. This year we figured we would try to end on the same note and record something just as important, if not more so. And that would be the Terran Crusade.
Quite right, Yuxin. Yeah, just a heads up. This is the second Terran Crusade that took place after the rebirth of Roboute Gulliman. Not the original Terran Crusade orchestrated by the Black Templars in the 36th millennium when they stormed Terra to usurp Goj Vandir.
Oh, you know, Zekthar, I had completely forgotten that it was called that by some scholars. After this one with Gilliman, it became to be called the Wars of Apostasy. But this one with Gilliman, the real question is, where should we start? We have chronicled the end of the 13th Black Crusade to Gilliman's resurrection, and we have even dabbled a little into the Indominus Crusade. So like I said, where do you think we should begin?
Well, how about I give a light recap and you can start after the rebirth of Gilliman?
Fantastic. Very well, carry on, good sir.
Well, let's see here. I'll try to make this as brief as I can. Cadia was no more, yet the Celestinian Crusade escaped only to be pursued by Abaddon. At this point in time, the Crusade consisted of Inquisitor Greyfax, just awoken from a Tesseract cube by Trazine on Cadia. A true pill to this story, if I do say so myself. Along with her, we have the winged Saint Celestine, the bodacious Marshal Marius Ulmric of the Black Templars, the Archmagos Belisarius Kahl, Yuxin's favorite person. Huh? Anywho, as they make their escape, they end up on an ice world and are saved by the Inari, Yvrain, and the Vizar, who accompany them to Macragge. It is here that they meet up with the mighty Marni Cal, his space wizard Tigerius, and the granddaddy space wizard of the Grey Knights, Aldrich Voldus. And through some shifty shenanigans, Kahl is able to reawaken Papa Smurf, Roboute Gulliman. And we will pick up 4 days after Gilliman's coronation. Well, how was that, Yuxin? Did I miss anything?
No, but if you fine listeners would like a more in-depth concept of this quick recap, we went into the fall of Cadia and the Ultramar campaign in full. Feel free to listen to Cadia Stands and the Ultramar campaign. Now, like my brother said, our story begins 4 days after Gilliman's coronation as the Lord of Ultramar emerged from seclusion. In his absence, Marius Calgar, aka Marni Cal, had continued to lead the fight, coordinating the Ultramarines' war effort. After Gilliman emerged from his seclusion, good old Cal willingly ceded control of the campaign to his gene-sire. Gilliman, though, kept Cal close at hand in the battles that followed, and asked his counsel constantly. Librarian Tigerius, too, swiftly became a trusted advisor, the Primarch accepting that in this darker age, the trappings and powers of the Librarius had, by necessity, also become darker. A move that surprised many. Gilliman also included Voldus, Kahl, Saint Celestine, and, unfortunately, Inquisitor Greyfax amongst his cadre of lieutenants. With his advisors at his side, and the unbowed might of the Ultramarines at his disposal, Gilliman began the reconquest of his homeworld. The war for Macragge lasted a little over a month, and its pace was blistering. Roboute Gulliman was a force of nature who drove his enemies before him like cattle. Grandmaster Voldus and his third Brotherhood of the Grey Knights were especially crucial in lending their might to the reconquest when they spearheaded the strike against the corrupted city of Colossae. Here the silver-armored demon hunters fought a cat-and-mouse battle with cruel bands of the Night Lords, who had veiled the city in an unnatural gloom. The traitors were eventually driven out, and a mysterious blood ritual halted before it could come to fruition. Though the entire city ended up being leveled from orbit for fear of its chaos taint.
Well, if anyone would be qualified to make that decision, it would probably be the Grey Knights.
Absolutely. With the Grey
Mhm.
Knights' help, it only took a few weeks of vicious battle and a vast toll of the dead for the world of Macragge to be liberated once more. The first steps had been taken upon the road of conquest. Macragge was free of chaos taint. Gulliman wished to press on, consumed by his desire to drive the ruinous powers from Ultramar. However, those he led needed time to regroup and consolidate. Gulliman was wise enough to give his followers the time they needed. During this time of respite, many successor chapters of the Ultramarines flocked to Gilliman's banner, gathering under his mighty name. While the armies of the Ultramar reconquest were gathering, a further opportunity presented itself. He was the Arch-Consul of Magna Civitas. The closest Ultramar had to a conventional planetary governor, who suggested that a grand victory parade could be held, and its majesty required on pitcasts to be sent far and wide through the Imperium. The consul said that people needed the light of hope in this dark hour, a shining example of victory to renew their faith not just in the Emperor, but in Gilliman Reborn. Gilliman saw the wisdom in it, and he accepted the aggrandizement grudgingly. Mere days after victory was declared, a grand triumph swept up from the Titan Gate to the very steps of the fortress of Hera. Thousands of war engines and millions of warriors presented their colors and raised cheers and horn blasts to the skies. A seething sea of the city's residents packed the crater-pocked processionals and plazas to watch the proceedings, and voices beyond count rang out as one to cry Gilliman's praise in a single deafening roar. Standing upon a marble-columned platform with his closest lieutenants at his side, the Primarch dutifully presented the most magnificent spectacle he could for the assembled masses. The Arch-Consul himself presented Gilliman with a stunningly wrought laurel wreath crafted in gold, urging the Primarch to don the gilded crown at once. The moment Gilliman did so, he found his mind filled with the thoughts of future glories. This paltry triumph would be nothing compared to the breathtaking spectacle of his galactic conquest. The Primarch's armies would be beyond number, their adoration for their heroic lord so great that they would die for him gladly. Planets, systems, whole segmentums would be renamed in honor of he who had liberated them, and the whipped dogs of chaos would flee before him like the curs they were. Statues would be raised to commemorate Gilliman's majesty, and eventually even the golden throne of Terra itself would be his to mount. The Emperor's most loyal son deserved no less than an inheritance, and he would have his due. It was this last thought that wrenched Gilliman from the wreath's insidious curse. With a gasp, he tore the gilded crown from his head and bellowed a command for the Arch-Consul to be restrained. Grandmaster Voldus snatched the robed dignitary, and as his blessed gauntlets touched the man's flesh, it sizzled and crisped. The din of the triumph was colossal, an ocean swell of noise that hid the Arch-Consul's shrieks as the illusions that veiled him were unmade. Gilliman and his lieutenants recoiled at the misshapen mutant thing that was revealed. It was a fleshy abomination, wearing a glowing amulet about its neck on a thong of human skin. As Gilliman stared in disgust at the chaos-warped thing in front of him, he heard a susurration hissing within his mind that he had not heard since that fateful encounter on Thessala 10 millennia before. In mocking tones, Fulgrim welcomed Gilliman back to his beloved Imperium. The demon Primarch revealed that he had concealed a fragment of his own animus in the amulet that his servant wore, and confessed disappointment that Gilliman had rejected his gift, the Crown of Glories. Many heroes, great and pure, had fallen to the trinket's blandishments, and Fulgrim had hoped that he could corrupt Gilliman in the same fashion. Yet the Slaneshi demon prince assured his brother that this was but the first of endless temptations that Gilliman would have to face. Laughing cruelly, he taunted that the Lord of Ultramar would never be able to trust any feeling of triumph or self-satisfaction again. Disgusted, Gilliman drove his sword through the amulet and into the hideous creature that bore it, silencing the voice of the damned brother who had laid him low millennia past. Yet, as the triumph rumbled on, Fulgrim's word continued to echo in Gilliman's mind. They would do so for many days to come.
You know, I find it interesting that what gathered Gilliman's senses is that he was owed conquest and he deserved lordship, which makes you kind of wonder, I mean, what is Gilliman's true goals?
Well, and his goal, the best that I could see it anyways, is more of trying to take the fight to the enemy in comparison to constantly being in defense and holding things back so that he can recover grounds that was lost, and on top of that, actually, like I said, shove the enemy back.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, anyways, I mean, I'm pretty sure his initial goal is, quite frankly, anyways, to regain the Imperium that once was, right? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, his ultimate goal. But, I mean, this whole concept of what really kind of brought him back from the brink was the thoughts, anyways, that he was owed an inheritance and whatnot. And most people, anyways, I think, anyways, would think kind of the same thing regardless, though. If he brings the Imperium back, I mean, I'm assuming that he's expecting to rule, yes?
No, it's what brings him back is the fact that he's seen that at this certain point that this shouldn't be matching. This isn't what he should technically be reaching for, this sort of glory, to the point that he would replace the Emperor.
So, okay, so it's the concept, I guess, anyways, that he wants to rule the Imperium, but he doesn't want to take his father's place. Is that what you're saying?
It's because of the fact that the thought that basically these ideas that are flying through, and the last thoughts are basically him completely overriding the Emperor, basically.
I mean, I hate to say this, but quite frankly, anyways, if he's going to succeed, he's going to kind of have to do that. I mean, the Emperor at this point, anyways, is just kind of, he's the corpse king? I mean, there ain't much left of him. So he's going to kind of have to, like, let me just squeeze in here, Ooh, this throne is comfy. I mean, he's going to kind of have to do that if the Imperium is going to succeed, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, the one thing that the Emperor also didn't like is the fact that this would be pretty much them worshiping him as a god.
I think we're kind of skirting around kind of the same thing. I think
which is what brought him out of it is the fact that, well, I don't want that. The Emperor didn't want that. Why would I want that?
Well, I think what we're skirting around is the concept, anyways, that what brings him out of it is that he's owed this. He deserves it. He should be treated this way, as opposed to what I think his goals are very similar to what he was imagining in his head. The difference is that the way he sees it, anyways, is that he is serving the Imperium by ruling, by bettering mankind, anyways, through his leadership, not awesome cosmic powers, kind of thing. Not, I will rule with an iron fist. So I think, anyways, it's what really transpires here is the concept that really shakes him out of it is that Gilliman really does kind of have more of a servant's heart than he does, anyways, a rule for self-gratification and for power and conquest.
Yeah.
Which to me, anyways, is kind of interesting. I mean, it kind of really builds his character, and it's a far cry, anyways, from who he was back in the 31st millennium. So I guess during his time in deep sleep, anyways, I guess he grew up a little bit, which I find interesting. But quite frankly, anyways, the concept, there's a huge difference between Gilliman of the 31st millennium and Gilliman of the 41st millennium.
Right.
I think a lot of that has to do with the simple fact of him, anyways, figuring out how bad the Imperium has gotten at this point.
Well, and let's face it, he's had 10,000 years to think.
Well, I don't know how much of his brain was still functioning, anyways, when he was in that, deep slumber. So I don't know. Like I said, I think it's
which makes you wonder how fully hinged is he at this point?
like I said, I think anyways that just the huge how far anyways the Imperium has fallen has really, quite frankly, anyways, is a heavy burden that he holds. And it's just the concept of he's like, okay, now I have to fix this. This is how bad it's gotten after 10,000 years, and now I am stuck fixing it. Right. Yay. As opposed to when the 31st millennium, where it was much more about like what this Crown of Glories wanted him to believe anyways. It was about conquest. It was about glories on the battlefield, Now I think he realizes that there's more to it than that. But I digress. Anyways, as the armies of the Reconquest gathered upon Macron, so ever more Imperial forces came seeking the Primarch. Some, like the Dark Angels and the Raven Guard, sent small delegations to determine the veracity of this miracle. Others came in hope and celebration. Bands of Space Wolves, White Scars, Black Templars, and others hastening to the Primarch's side. A glorious moment came to pass when the Black Templars made planetfall, for they were reunited with Marshal Marius Ulmric, who alone of his brotherhood had survived the battle in Gilliman's shrine. The Marshal was brought aboard the strike cruiser Scourge of Heretics, and girded with the armor and the black sword of the Emperor's champion. Others, too, came to Ultramar upon the insistence of their seers, astropaths, soothsayers, and lords, battleships of the Imperial Navy, regal barons of Imperial-aligned night worlds, fleets of warships from the Adeptus Mechanicus and their Titan legions, processions from the Adeptus Ministratum, all came to offer fealty to the Primarch. Even a grotesque cyber cynoid of the Adeptus Ministorum descended upon the fortress of Hera and insisted upon first confirming and then proclaiming Gilliman's alleged divinity. The horrified Primarch agreed to such beatification only after Celestine and Greyfax impressed upon him just how powerful the ecclesiarchy was in the Imperium of the 41st millennium. Better to have them as a firebrand ally than an unruly foe.
Pardon me, brother, but I think we should pause here and explain why this interaction is so interesting.
Oh, most definitely, brother. Carry on.
So, obviously, the ecclesiarchy wasn't here at the time the Gilliman was before he was in stasis for 10,000 years.
It was, but it was really, really small. It was just coming.
What I mean is, it wasn't like
the all-powerful thing that it is now.
Yeah. Requiring a third Inquisition group to
oversee it and manage it. Yes. That's one thing, but this goes back to actually just what we were just talking about anyways. Like Gilliman from the 31st to the 41st millennium. This is one of the reasons why the Imperium has fallen so far downfield. Right. It's because of the ecclesiarchy. It's this aspect of, rule by fear. It's the exact opposite of what the Emperor wanted, quite frankly.
Well, in this case, the ecclesiarchy, the reason why they press it upon him is the fact that it's such a large part of the Imperium now.
Yeah.
That you don't want to. I assume Greyfax, even if she wasn't a fanatic, would look at this and go, yeah, you don't want to mess with the ecclesiarchy, even if I do or don't believe in the ecclesiarchy, because if you go against that, you're going against like the majority of the Imperium's religious beliefs.
I understand anyways why they counsel
and all the forces to come with it.
Be cool with it, but the reason why I find this interesting though is the fact that the more we find this out anyways is the farther we go along in the career of Roboute Gulliman is that the more he moves on anyways in the 41st millennium, the more he is trying to weaken the ecclesiarchy, but doing it in a sense anyways that it doesn't look like he's doing that.
Right.
He has to be sneaky about such things. It's the only thing it seems like that he really kind of tiptoes around, which is interesting. But yeah, it's just this concept anyways of and like I said before anyways, is that this is something that kind of is coming completely out of left field to him. I mean,
Right.
31st millennium, it was, what was it? It was the imperial truth was the big deal, kind of thing. And the emperor kept going around telling people, I'm not a god. Stop worshiping me. So the fact that after all these years, anyways, no matter what the emperor said, he is now referred to as the God Emperor. So
Yeah.
I still think one of my favorite sayings is done by Bjorn, the old Grey Wolf Dreadnought.
Yeah.
He said, the emperor being a god, isn't that how this whole thing got started? Isn't how this whole Horus Heresy thing got started? So, yeah. Anyways, it's one of those weird motivators, anyways, that Gilliman is working around that I find intriguing. And honestly, anyways, more power to him. I'm rooting for him. I really hope they just kind of squash the ecclesiarchy. It's terrible. It's so terrible. But moving on. When the armies of Reconquest were ready to set out, Roboute Gulliman led them into battle with something akin to relief. After the endless political infighting and bureaucracy of this turgid new imperium, the thought of a battlefield seemed almost welcoming. Gilliman began with the Macrogge system itself. Several of those worlds were beset by the forces of chaos. Gilliman led a brutal campaign, and through victory after victory, the Macrogge system was made secure, allowing the armies of the Imperial Reconquest to sweep on towards the neighboring star systems that made up the realm of Ultramar. That stellar domain had once comprised 500 human-settled worlds, before Lord Gilliman had granted many their own sovereignty after the Horus Heresy. All such treaties, the Primarch now declared null and void. The 500 worlds of Ultramar, reborn like their new ruler. In such grim and desperate times, he would see his personal empire forged anew. For in this, as in all things, Gilliman desired strength through unity. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worse when on the 7th month of the campaign to reconquer Ultramar, the first cases of a mysterious new sickness were reported. Throughout the Droll, Talisar, and Parmenio systems, Ultramar Defense Auxilia found themselves weeping uncontrollably. In the midst of battle, warriors were blinded by endless streams of vicious, stinking tears that gummed their eyes open and soon turned them red raw. Overcome by sorrow, sufferers wailed and wept for solar days on end. In the worst cases, the so-called weepers were permanently blinded as their infected eyeballs festered and rotted from their skulls. The disease, soon named the sorrow, or the weeping plague, spread with alarming rapidity. Its vector was believed to be an infestation of tiny, biting mites that were found amidst rations, squirming inside uniforms and ammunition packs, and even spilled from the pages of open Imperial primers. Nothing stopped the mites from multiplying, and no sanitary measure could keep them out. The new plague quickly became more than a minor inconvenience, and became a major hindrance to the reconquering of the 500 worlds. Roboute Gulliman hastened to the plague world, and upon his arrival on the world of Ravishul, expecting nothing but sadness and horror, Gilliman ordered the camp's ultramarine commander to lead him to the sick. There were several thousands of them in this encampment alone. Tank crews, artillerymen, and infantry soldiers trammeled for their own protection within huge, prefabricated sheds. From outside, the muffled cacophony of the weepers' lamentation was unsettling, even for Roboute Gulliman. Yet the shed's armored doors swung open. The sobbing slowly died away. One by one, the stricken auxilia rose from their sickbeds, blinking in amazement with eyes that could see once more. Even those that had lost their sight altogether subsided with sighs of relief, knowing their first true sleep in weeks. None could explain how, but Gilliman's presence had healed the weepers. The same thing occurred in 3 more encampments along the offensive stalled front. Wherever Roboute Gulliman walked, the sorrow was driven out, and the mites that spread it died until they piled in black drifts. The medicae and the apothecaries were at a loss, but the ecclesiarchy were quick to declare the phenomenon miraculous. It was the emperor's mercy, they bellowed, brandishing their aquillas, and it shone from his sun as a healing light. So began long solar weeks, a relentless pilgrimage for Gilliman, as he rushed from one site of sickness to another. The Primarch knew that while he was engaging in healing his followers, his attentions were drawn away from the wider war. This seemed to be the insidious true goal of the plague spreaders all along, as days became weeks, during which the weeping continued to spread. And worse still, recurrent sites that the Primarch had already cleared. Without Gilliman's peerless genius, the Reconquest began to suffer, the Chaos Forces overturning Imperial victories in the Viridian and Tarvan systems. All the while, the dreadful warp storms that had riven Ultramar and its surrounding worsened further. It was Grandmaster Aldrich Voldus who finally confronted Gilliman. In a heated argument, during which the Grandmaster dared the Primarch's wrath, he forced Gilliman to acknowledge that which he already knew. Weeks of labor had been for naught. Gilliman was not healing his subjects, for such was not his gift. In the Weeping Plague, Voldus recognized all the hallmarks of Nurgle. Most likely, the Plague God was simply withdrawing his dubious blessings from his victims upon Gilliman's arrival, then gleefully restoring them once the Primarch had moved on. The Lord of Ultramar was playing into the Plague God's hands, his desire to save his people perverted into a never-ending trap of entropy and despair. Though furious, Gilliman accepted Voldus's wisdom. Further, he saw that Nurgle's desire had been to trap him within his own realm and to keep him from the wider galactic stage. The Primarch realized then that his desire for completeness, for a not solution in an unsullied Ultramar, was, in itself, an echo of mistakes he had made long ago. Nurgle did not wish Gilliman to leave Ultramar because there, the Primarch could be contained like a wasp in a bottle. But this war did not belong to Ultramar alone. It was a war for the entire Imperium. Gilliman saw that he could waste no more time focusing solely upon his own stellar empire. He must tend, instead, to his father's. With a heavy heart, Roboute Gulliman stopped his efforts to end the Weeping Plague, instead charging his apothecaries and chaplains with finding a spiritual cure for what was clearly a spiritual affliction. The Primarch announced his intentions to set out upon a great journey. Once before, when the Dark Gods had threatened the Imperium of Man, the Primarch of the Ultramarines had reached Terra too late to do his duty. He would not make that mistake again. Gilliman intended to journey to Terra, to kneel at the foot of the Golden Throne and ask his father for guidance. The Primarch, though, would not travel alone. Yet the war across Ultramar was still ongoing, and with Gilliman leaving, it would require strategically gifted warriors to keep pushing the forces of chaos back. As such, Gilliman gathered a select force of battle brothers from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd companies of the Ultramarines to accompany him to Terra, and gave the honor of their command to Captain Cato Sicarius. He further requested that Grandmaster Aldrich Voldus and the Grey Knights of the Third Brotherhood join his crusade. Others pledged their aid to the Primarch's cause, including the assembled strength of the Primogenitor chapters, the Emperor's champion Almeric and his Black Templars brethren, the Living Saint, the Inquisitor Greyfax, and Archmagos Dominus Call accompanied the Primarch also. Whatever aid they or their military forces under their command could provide the Primarch would be gladly given. Gilliman gratefully accepted all offers of aid before commanding Marnius Calgar, Chief Librarian Tigerius, and Captain Agamon to remain and lead the reconquest of Ultramar. The Ynnari, meanwhile, chose at this moment to depart. The Eldar had their own wars to fight and had already lingered overlong amidst human affairs. Though Cadia had fallen, worlds still remained upon which the Necron-built black pylons stood strong. It was to these that the Ynnari would now attend, directing those of their race who would listen to defend them and thus hold back the expanding power of the warp. The final meeting of the commanders of the Ynnari and Gilliman is something of note, taking place in an empty audience chamber of the Fortress of Hera. In a matter of hours, the Terran Crusade would depart Macragge, yet the Primarch had found a few moments to speak with the Ynnari leaders alone. Even after solar weeks of mutually fruitful alliance, most warriors would have been cautious of standing alone in the presence of two such sinister and powerful Xenos. Gilliman was not most warriors.
It will be a long and dangerous journey. The galaxy grows darker by the day. Have a care, Primarch. You may have cheated death once, but you are not invincible.
Gilliman nodded solemnly.
Can I say nothing that will convince you to join us on our road? I have come to value the strength of you and your warriors greatly these past weeks.
You cannot. Already we have given you the gift of rebirth, not to mention a number of our people's lives. Is that not enough?
It is a debt I'm sure won't be forgotten. But tell me this. Khal may have fashioned the armor that I wear, but it was not he alone who ensured my resurrection, was it?
Yvraine smiled demurely.
His technology would have healed your physical wounds, Roboute, but you and I know the worst damage has been done to your soul. So no, Primarch, it is by the grace of Ened that you stand once more amongst the living. If you wish to remain, however, I would caution you against removing your war plate. Not that you could easily do so.
A flicker passed across Gilliman's features as this, a faint ghost of pain well hidden, was replaced by a stony mask of duty.
I could press you for greater insight into the powers that brought me back, and assurances against any taint in their nature, said Gilliman, noting how the Ynnari stiffened their postures at this. He continued, but I suspect that our newfound understanding is of more value to my father's realm than my own satisfaction, and that those answers would not come easily.
Yvraine inclined her head, while the Vizark silently eased to stand away from the hilt of his blade.
Thus, instead, I shall simply wish you victory in your ongoing battles against our mutual foes.
May you walk with fortune, Roboute Gulliman, and know that we shall stand together in battle again before whatever end befalls us.
The Vizark offered an elaborate warrior salute to Gilliman, who nodded curtly in return before the Eldar turned and swept gracefully from the chamber.
No doubt we will,
murmured the Primarch thoughtfully, watching the enigmatic Xenos withdraw.
As long as it serves your needs.
Now, before we carry on, I think we should take a minute here to discuss the relations between the Ynnari and the Imperium. Don't you, Yuxin?
No, but we'll do it anyways.
Okay, by the way, the Ynnari in and of themselves, I kind of find fascinating because they are literally a band of pretty much every type of Eldar you can think of. They're Eldari, they're Drukhari, they're the, what do they call them? Harlequins are, I think, tossed in there.
Yeah.
Who are the dinosaur riders?
Exodites?
Yeah, Exodites. I mean, Coursers. I mean, it's a group of like pretty much everybody. It's almost like it's the Eldar again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that there's still, even though they've hugely helped out the Imperium, there still is this huge lack of trust between the two groups.
Yeah.
I mean, like, huge.
One of the things that's interesting is how, for some reason, the Harlequins were following her, which kind of comes in conflict with the fact that her group worships the god of the dead. Meanwhile, the Harlequins follow a different god.
Yeah, but okay, we looked that up a while ago, and it was I can't even remember what they call it. The whole end dance or whatever. And there's like a couple of versions of it, and one of them has to do that Ened is very important to their final dance.
Yeah.
And
so
what's his face?
Apparently not everybody that was following Yvraine then were technically part of the Ynnari.
Was that?
So what you say is the Harlequins weren't technically part of the Ynnari since they are the ones that straight up worship and follow the god of the dead.
Well, they're still with them. It's just, it's one of those. It's kind of like one of those that's like Turn 42's United States Army. You've got some Muslims in there, some Christians, and some Buddhists. I mean, but they all follow one banner. That's probably the best way I could describe it.
Okay.
I mean, they all have they all have this similar focus and goal, and that is to bring what's his face back from his slumber, the god of the dead. Yeah. So that guy. So, but to me, anyways, I think the thing that's interesting about this is that there's still like this, even though they've been helping each other out for like the last few months, there's still this huge distrust between, especially like Gilliman and the leaders of the Ynnari.
Well, they've had such wonderful relations up till this point, haven't they?
Well, for the last few months they have. I think that what's really telling though.
A month.
What has been really telling though is the last line, anyway. The last thing that that Gilliman says is this whole concept of as long as it serves your needs. So I think he's under no impression that they are helping out the Imperium of Man out of the goodness of their heart and they want to start an alliance with them. He's like, no. They're doing this for some weird reason that benefits them.
And vice
Bringing
versa.
them back just happens to be something that benefited them. That's you know, I don't, and I think he's absolutely 100% true. Was that?
And vice versa.
Yeah. So it's more of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend concept instead of we're good chums.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of like I said, I think it's interesting that he really actually he sees them anyways, I think on friendly terms, but there's always this concept that he has. It's like, well, what are they really after?
But they are Xenos. I mean,
which is another interesting, very huge difference between 41st Millennium Roboute Gulliman and 31st Millennium Roboute Gulliman. Gilliman, once he got brought back, if he was back in the 31st Millennium, it wouldn't have even been a thought. He probably just killed them all. Because, you know, humanity should not suffer the Xenos or the alien to live.
which seemed to be the same thing. But anyways.
It was really kind of pushed by the Emperor. So, yeah. But anyways, why don't you tell us anyways how this crusade, did the crusade start off pretty well?
Well, once the great fleet of the Terran Crusade was assembled in orbit above Macragge, Roboute Gulliman made for Terra. On the pleas of their navigators, the starship's captains dared only short jumps through the wall. These quick and terrifying sprints ended, more often than not, in frantic crash dives into real space, as the dangers became too great. Several voidcraft were lost, and many captains beseeched Saint Celestine for her blessings to safeguard their passage. Gilliman traveled...
Pardon me, Yuxin. I got a quick question for you. So, we know that some Space Marine chapters don't believe that the Emperor is a god, and some do. I've never really figured out, anyways, what do the Ultramarines think?
They think yes.
They view him as a god?
Yes.
Okay. I wonder how long they did after Gilliman came back, but just a thought. I was just kind of curious because I know, like, for instance, the Space Wolves definitely don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of the chapters do. And since so few of this is actually the Ultramarines and it's the successor chapters of the Ultramarines, which
No, that's a
would
good
be
point.
more susceptible.
Yeah, I think a lot of, if I recall right, a lot of the first foundings still don't believe the god or the Emperor is a god, but a lot of the successor chapters are and successor foundings move more towards that because I mean they're born in a different millennium. They weren't there originally. Their history doesn't go far enough back anyways that they remember fighting with the Emperor. It's one of the reasons why the Space Wolves have been so firm anyways of no, he's not a god, is because they still have Bjorn. They wake up every once in a while to tell stories of the Emperor fighting with Lehman Russ. So at this point anyway,
he wasn't always decrepit old man on the throne.
Or what's left of him. Sorry. Carry on, sir.
Okay, where was I? Ah, yes. Gilliman traveled aboard his chapter's ancient flagship, Macragg's Honor, his ship from eons past. He had hoped that the warp storms around Ultramar were sent to entrap him. As the Crusade fleet traveled ever further from his realm and the storms continued to rage, the Primarch was disabused of this hopeful notion. Every time the fleet dropped out of warp space, Gilliman had his Astras comb the darkness of the void, seeking to ensnare every fragment of information he could about the state of the Imperium. With the Immaterium in turmoil, those astropathic communiques that made it through were jumbled and nightmarish to interpret. What news the Crusade fleet managed to gather was uniformly dire, and left all who heard them cold with dread. Yet despite the news, the Terran Crusade forged onward, For the soldiers aboard the ships, the weeks crawled past in an agony of inactivity and agitation. A constant state of high alert was required fleet-wide, for at any moment they might come under sudden attack. Yet for all their constant training, drilling, patrolling, and waiting, still nothing occurred. Even amongst the superhuman warriors of the Depths Astartes, tempers frayed and inaction chafed. When at last the fleet was threatened, it came so suddenly that even the Depths Astartes and Cult Mechanicus were caught off guard. The Terran Crusade had reached the trailing edges of the permanent warp rift known as the Maelstrom, and had found it swollen with fearsome new power. The fleet's navigators moaned and screamed, describing something akin to an endless and possibly immense tornado thundering in the warp. Where safe channels should have existed, the billowing fringes of the Maelstrom had consumed all. Even the light of the Astronomicon became faltering and nigh impossible to see. Fearing for the safety of their brutalized craft, the fleet's captains ordered immediate translation to real space. One by one, the Imperial warships tore through the meniscus of reality, streamers of glowing ectoplasm trailing from their hulls as they plunged back into the cold darkness of the void. Yet the thunderous shuddering on board each voidcraft continued, intensifying violently as impacts flared upon void shields and smashed through armored hulls. The Hawklord's frigate, Wings of Glory, was ripped apart by a string of punishing explosions before its crew even knew who or what was attacking them. Frantic orders filled the Voxnet and echoed through the cavernous ship's bridges as furious captains attempted to establish the nature of the threat. Had the fleet dropped out of the warp and straight into an asteroid field? Had they, by some horrible chance, emerged into the midst of a hostile foe? As auspexes awoke and observation decks were unshrouded, the bleak truth became clear. The scattered ships of the Terran Crusade had indeed exited the Immaterium straight into the thundering guns of an enemy armada. But it looked as though this was no accident of chance. Arrayed in perfect ambush formations were dozens of traitor warships bearing the Baroque and ancient markings upon their hulls. The Loyalists realized that a vast fleet of the thousand suns surrounded them, deployed as though they had known precisely where and when the Imperial forces would emerge from the warp. At the heart of the enemy hung a strange craft of surpassing immensity. Only Gilliman truly understood its appearance. Recognizing a vast silver facsimile of the Great Pyramid of Tisca, vast as a planetoid, bristling with gun decks of baffling shape and function, and boasting an immense red crystal eye upon one flank. The insane structure was clearly both flagship and starport for the enemy fleet. Gilliman knew his brothers well, and here, in this grandiose war engine, he saw all the hallmarks of his brother, Magnus the Red. To the Loyalist fleet's rear loomed the squirming spiral arms of the Maelstrom. To their fore was the titanic pyramid of Magnus, its attendant warships already pummeling Gilliman's armada. With little choice, the Imperials fought as best they could in their scattered dispersal, torpedoes fired from launch tubes, streaking through the void to blast ragged holes in heretic warships. Fire squadrons scrambled, jetting out into the darkness like swarming insects. Lance arrays spat ruby light, and gun decks thundered as the Imperial ships frantically attempted to fight free of their ambushing foes. Yet the Imperial craft were taking a terrible hammering, void shields collapsing and ruptured decks venting screaming crewmen into space. Engines flared out and died under volley after volley of macro shells, while rune-inscribed torpedoes swept in to fill Loyalist bridges with warp flame. Gilliman issued a steady stream of orders to his captains, doing everything in his power to gather his ships and fight back. Inwardly, he raged, while Magnus watched with amused satisfaction from the grand observation gallery aboard his pyramidal flagship. He had fashioned the vast void craft named Tiska's Revenge, using the plundered resources of an imperial world and the nameless energies of the warp. Now he conjured those empiric powers again, for an altogether different purpose. A cabal of powerful chaos sorcerers stood around Magnus, chanting ominous words as he raised his arms high and cried out in stentorian tones. The Crimson King called, and so the warp answered. Quailing tendrils of power coalescing to surround Gilliman's battered fleet. Magnus judged the damage done to be sufficient. He had no desire to kill his resurrected brother. Not yet, anyways. Thus, with the final booming incantation, Magnus completed his spell. The empiric tendrils clamped tight around the starships of the Terran Crusade, and, with a vast convulsive wrench, dragged them deep into the raging heart of the maelstrom. Pandemonium seized the void ships of the Terran Crusade, crushing tendrils of empiric energy wound about the craft like the tentacles of some leviathan beast. Bulkheads crumpled, shields blew out. Powerless to resist, the warships were plucked from reality and dragged into the warp. Desperate tech adepts stumbled over their rituals as they strove madly to raise their ship's stellar fields. Some succeeded, but other craft were inundated with howling masses of demons as they were dragged unwarded into the warp. Madness and slaughter ran rife, and only the staunch determination of the Imperial armies aboard each ship prevented the Terran Crusade from being utterly annihilated. By the time Magnus's spell ran its course, the starships of the Terran Crusade had been cast deep into the maelstrom. Gilliman's fleet had, at least, been spat from the maw of the warp once more. But the region they now found themselves in was a cursed one. Within the maelstrom, reality and the immaterium melted together in a strange morass. The stars were lost behind drifting veils of unnatural energy, and twisted worlds hung amidst the shimmering gloom. From a vast fleet of 112 Space Marine, Imperial Navy, and Adeptus Mechanicus warships, barely half remained. Some had been lost during the Thousand Suns ambush, blown apart by blistering firepower. More had vanished during the subsequent mayhem, cast far adrift upon the tides of the Immaterium. Some, doubtless, would have made it to real space, scattered distant from the main body of the fleet. Others were surely lost or worse. All the fighter craft launched during the brief battle were gone, their crews doomed to cold and lonely death in the void of space. Hundreds upon hundreds of chapters serfs, human crewmen and servitors were injured, insane, or dead, and even the Space Marines had taken substantial casualties. The Terran Crusade had been reduced to a shadow of its former military strength. Not one warship had survived the ambush unscathed, and many were sorely damaged. Crushing though the sudden losses were, they were still not Roboute Gulliman's greatest worry. Stranded deep in the maelstrom with no sight of the Emperor's Astronomicon to guide them, the surviving warriors of the Terran Crusade required some means by which they could determine their location and find their way back into real space. Seizing upon the faint transmissions emanating from a nearby moon, the Crusade made for the dark planetoid in the hope of either capturing a traitor who could act as their unwilling guide, or else gaining access to heretic astrogation instruments hardened against the roiling energies of the warp.
Pardon me, brother, but I have to explain something very important about the warp.
Which is?
It's another universe. Well, okay, kind of. So we haven't really discussed the warp much. When we do, it's normally just kind of like, is that terrible place where all the demons live? And which is true, but it's more than that. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain.
Well,
how would you explain?
worst part is that it's hard to explain, especially when you have the maelstrom, which is a blurred area between the two, which is where they are right now.
Well, the Maelstrom is very much like, well, when it was still around anyways, the Eye of Terror. It's just smaller. That's the best way to describe the Maelstrom. So it is a way into the warp. But, I mean, the weird part about the warp is that there are, like you just described anyways, there are planets in the warp. Yeah.
Well, except for these planets are in the Maelstrom, not the warp.
The Maelstrom is part of the warp. It's like the Eye of Terror is a gateway to the warp. The Maelstrom is the same. It's just smaller than the Eye of Terror. So if you go into the Maelstrom, you're going into the warp. This is very much like if you go into the Eye of Terror, you're going into the warp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is one of the problems about the warp. They have like 15 different names for it.
It's the Imperium. It's the Immaterial. It's the warp. It's
chaos.
It's chaos. So it's the thing that makes it weird is like you said anyways, if they go into they're in the warp at this point, but it's just like it's got solar systems in it, it's got planets, but they don't function the right way. It's like you said, it's chaos. So they could find a planet that's great, and they could sit there for a while if they want. But I mean, trying to find your way out of the warp if you don't know what you're doing is like throwing a dart at a dartboard anyways. It's 50 yards out and hoping that it sticks while blindfolded and get that bullseye. So it's they're in quite the pickle. I believe is the best way to describe it here. How do they get out?
Well, they don't. I mean, yeah. Anyways, landing parties mounted gunships and drop pods, streaking down through thin, pale skies onto a dark and glassy world. The loyalists found vitrified continents, barren of life and tormented by powerful screaming winds. An unnatural light glowed deep within the world's glass heart, and left all who glimpsed it with an ominous sense of dread. The Crusade strike force located an armored fortification amongst a range of mountains, clinging limpet-like amidst glinting peaks. Gulliman himself led the attack that breached the defenses, finding to his disgust that a ragged band of renegade space marines garrisoned the fortress. Crosses daubed over these warriors, chapter iconography identified them as Red Corsairs, and the Primarch vented his... What?
Said,
Yeah.
Those are, what's his face?
Blackheart.
Blackheart, yeah. This Lufthoron's boys. Or sorry, what is it? What is it? It's something Blackheart.
Yeah.
Blackheart?
Huron
Blackheart. Right. It's his guys.
Yeah.
Sorry. Carry on, sir.
And the Primarch vented his pent-up anger and frustration upon the luckless traitors. The battle was brief. Gilliman and a trio of Aldrich Voldus's Dread Knights slaughtering the renegade leaders.
Excuse me, brother. What is a Dread Knight?
Okay, so a Dread Knight is succinctly an artificial construct of humanoid shape made of adamantine alloy, ceramite plates, and a compact yet powerful plasma reactor. Originally, it's built basically to face and take on greater demons of chaos, like the ones that are like 20, 30 feet tall.
Well, from the pictures that I've seen of it, it looks very similar to, I can't even remember what they call them, but the things that the Sisters of Battle use.
Yeah.
The armored mech units that they use. It's like a souped up version of a Centurion armor, from what I gather.
Yeah.
It's like a blend between that and a dreadnought, but not, the horrible sarcophagus thing. It's like the guy can get out of it. Let's put it that way. Yeah. He's not just stuck in there. So they're kind of size wise, they're about what, half the size of a knight?
Probably around there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. When first you said Dread Knight, I thought it was like I always thought that was kind of like a chaos thing, but I guess not.
Well, they're the full title of them are Nemesis Dread Knights, which
Ah.
gives it more of a, this is the nemesis of evil.
And Dread Knights, are they only used by the Grey Knights?
Yes.
Okay. That's why I probably haven't seen them very often. But anyway,
Because
sorry.
They were built to face off against creative
Giant
demons
demons,
of
yes.
chaos.
Like bloodthirsters. And yes. Sorry, carry on, sir.
However, when Gilliman successfully seized the last traitor alive in the Fortress Voxray, a diabolical manifestation occurred. The air crackled and rime crawled across the metal walls of the chamber as a menacing demonic presence spoke through the captive's mouth. In two mocking voices, Kyros, the Fate Weaver, spoke and said, "Even now, Ultramar burned. The evil thing cackled that the Primarch had abandoned his people to wander the maelstrom forever. Then it twisted the head of the captive around with a sickening crack."
Sorry to interrupt again, Yuxin, but who the devil is Karos the Fate Weaver?
Kyros the Fate Weaver is the Oracle of Zinch.
Is he the guy that's
god of change?
Is he like the bird dude that's got two heads? That one sees in the past and the other one sees in the future, but he can't see the present.
Is the one with the two heads.
Okay. Yeah, he's different. Let's put it that way. If I recall right, anyways, he's the guy that got that Zinch tossed into like this weird portal of time, and when he came back out, he had two heads, and one could see into the past, and the other could see into the future, but he can't see the present.
Okay, so concerning that particular thing, although Zinch could see all the past and present, he was unable to grasp the uncannibal threads of the future. The need to overcome this one weakness took Zinch to the mystic well of eternity.
Ah, there it is.
At the center of reality, where space and time originate and end. However, even Zinch was afraid to enter the roiling currents of the well, so instead, he sent his Lords of Change.
You just started kicking
But none
demons
of
into
them
the portal.
ever returned. Finally, so first he tried his Lords of Change, which failed. So finally, he grabbed his Vizier, Kyros, and cast him into the well. This time, Kyros survived. Just. But when he resurfaced, Kyros was unnaturally aged, hunched, and wizened. His mighty pinions were reduced to feeble vestigial remains, and he now had two heads. Henceforth, Kyros held both the knowledge of the future and the resulting insanity, and sits at Zinch's right side as his oracle. He is constantly mumbling madly and suddenly bursting into rambling tirades about events still to happen.
That'd be so frustrating if you said just randomly turns and looks at him like, "You were such an idiot. I can't believe you did something that stupid. What? What did I do? No. What? Wait. No. You didn't tell me. No, I don't tell you anything.
81 Lords of Change tasked with recording every word of the oracle.
Yeah. So, like I said, Karos is kind of an interesting. He's out there, but sorry. Thank you for describing who he is.
Yeah. Moving on. Gilliman, cursed as his only lead, expired amidst the sizzle and bang of overloading Vox banks. He vowed to locate the demon and wring the truth from it, no matter what he had to endure. I don't know if he even knows who Kyros the Fate Weaver is, actually. But anyways.
Maybe. I don't know. More than likely, anyways, he's just like, I'm just going to kill that demon. I don't think he really cares who he is. Along those lines. But, sorry, go ahead.
After their encounter on the glass moon, the Crusade fleet wandered aimlessly, with no indication of the course that would take them to Terra. Gilliman picked a direction based upon his best guess. In other words, sticking his finger up. Chicken for air.
Which way is the wind blowing? We're in space, you idiot. Right.
I feel it going that way. That's the air conditioner. Shut up.
Shut up. It's the
You
captain.
dare
The captain wants to head in a particular
contradict
direction.
the Primarch of the Ultramarines?
If Captain wants to go in a particular direction, he's like, set up the fans. That way we know which way we're going. Anyways.
And instructed his captains to turn to that heading. Hoping to reach the maelstrom's edge seemed the only available plan. So it went on for an indeterminate and bewildering span of time that felt like impossible centuries. As the Terran Crusade fleet forged on, their supplies running low and their crews exhausted by constant battle, Roboute Gulliman became ever angrier and more distracted. Unbeknownst to all, the Primarch was bedeviled by horrific visions given by Kairos. Gulliman saw the realm of Ultramar in flames, and the bastions of mankind blowing away as ash upon the blood-wet winds of change. He is tormented by images of Mars, shattered into hundreds of pieces, and raining down as flaming meteors upon the once proud ruin of Terra. He saw the golden throne as a sparking fire-wreathed wreck, the Emperor's blackened corpse burning within it. There are glimpses of a singularly dark fate that would transpire only should he escape the maelstrom and complete his journey to Terra. They were glimpses of a singularly dark fate that would transpire only should he escape the maelstrom and complete his journey to Terra. Relent in his attempt to escape, accept his warp-tainted prison for all eternity, give in to madness and despair, and he would spare the Imperium from coming to this terrible end. Gulliman wrestled internally with each passing day, yet he showed no sign of his struggle to those who looked to him for leadership and hope. The Primarch maintained his veneer of strength and continued to pursue his goal of escape, determined that he would not believe the lies of any entity that inhabited that hellish place. Still, the Primarch's resolve eroded slowly as a cliff washed away by the endless ocean waves. Ever still through the darkened aspect of the warp, Kairos the Fate Weaver was ever in Gulliman's mind, plaguing him with what could be, and to the Primarch what would be humanity's doom. Anxious as to the fate of the wider Imperium, and with several ships now left scuttled in their wake due to accumulated battle damage, the Crusade fleet came upon a world of black marble and bloody seas. They struck hard and fast against several Red Corsair strongholds, eliminating outlying enclaves, before finally laying siege to a fortified palace upon a claw-shaped headland above booming, gory waves. While Archmagos Call coordinated the siege, Greyfax and Captain Catos Acarius led a daring raiding party that threw open the palace's main gates and sealed the heretics' doom. Gulliman knew that this victory offered a brief respite at best. The screaming of the bloody ocean was eroding his followers' sanity, and amongst the ashen skies overhead, huge dark shapes stirred with the promise of terrible danger. Yet the logistics of stripping the Corsair's fortress would take time, even with the Primarch's meticulously efficient plans. Thus, as Mechanicus bulk haulers rumbled back and forth through the planet's atmosphere, Gulliman found himself wandering alone through the twisted Citadel's corridors. It was as he entered the chamber of crystal statues that shimmering mist rose before the Primarch's eyes. Amidst the swirling patterns of light and shadow, a slender figure flickered into being. Gulliman caught the suggestion of willowy limbs and billowing cloth, a curving alien helm and a long stave, before the figure spoke. Like its image, the manifestation's voice swam in and out of Gulliman's perception. Yet, the Lord of Ultramar was able to decipher instructions from the figure's words. Gulliman was wary of further trickery, suspicious and plagued by the echoes of the demonic whispers that Kairos Fate Weaver had projected into his mind. Yet he sensed no taint of chaos in this manifestation. The energies given off by the shimmering vision were more akin to those of the Eldari, who had aided his resurrection. At last, after repeating its message several times, the figure vanished, leaving the Primarch with a new sense of purpose and, perhaps, even a sliver of hope. Here, at last, was a heading, and Gilliman meant to follow it. Who is this creature that gives Gilliman hope? What alien in the most alien of concepts of the galaxy gives him a concept of glory?
Malice, perhaps?
Perhaps, but probably not. Let's continue on, shall we?
Indeed. Upon leaving the unnamed world of black marble and blood, the remnants of the Terran Crusade fleet set out with new determination. The Crusade now numbered a third of the ships that had departed Ultramar, but they were still led by Gilliman's flagship, the Crag's Honor, and they still stood ready for battle at any moment. They had a heading at last, albeit one derived from an omen-laden whispering of an unknown figure. Following the hidden stranger's directions, they passed through the maelstrom with relative ease, and hope of escape was within their grasp. Yet first, they would have to brave what the figure had described as the resting place of hollow ghosts. At first, the region appeared as a silvered speckling of space, stretching out in all directions ahead of the fleet. Gradually, those glimmering motes grew in size and definition, until, at a distance of no more than a few thousand Terran miles, they resolved themselves into a breathtaking and eerie sight. Thousands upon thousands of wrecked starships drifted here, their hulls linked together by vast webs of brass chain. Lit by the jade stars that loomed in the middle distance, derelict voidcraft of every sort trailed wreckage behind them as they hung silently in their cursed afterlife. Some were familiar, ancient marks of Imperial warships, splinter-boned Eldar wrecks, hollowed Kroot war spheres, the broken-backed Rudd Warren ships, and the empty remnants of Nakassar Taus. Others were unidentifiable, black needles of glassy material, ravaged structures like spaceborne hive cities, vast, angular leviathans, and tiny ellipsoid ships, little bigger than a drop pod. How they had all come to be abandoned here was an unsettling puzzle. The hazard that they and their binding chains presented was clear enough, however. The first thought of Gilliman and his captains was to attempt to circumnavigate the starship graveyard. Yet the ghost vessels trailed away, seemingly into infinity above, below, and to either side. If the Terran Crusade wished to pass this way, and it seemed that they must if they wanted their freedom, then they would have to push forward between the wrecks. Progress was painfully slow, for in places the wrecks were chained just a Terran mile or so apart, tangling in vast chain webs like the prey of some cosmic arachnid. Tech magi and chapter serfs flinched and sweated as each new scrape and groan from the Voidcraft's hulls as the ship forged their slow and steady path forwards. Despite exercising every caution, the larger ships could not completely avoid collision. Yet even bumping various hulks, Archimagos Hall announced that he was reading clear space ahead. They were nearing the edge of the debris field, and, more relieving still, it appeared they were nearing the edge of the maelstrom. Past the last chained wrecks, the navigators, who had been near comatose for many solar days, could perceive a distant flicker. They awoke, muttering with increasing excitement. They could see once more the barest shred of the Astronomicon's light, and though it shone through the gap in a partially open door. Gilliman counseled caution and ordered his crews to continue their careful, steady progress. Yet he too grew more hopeful by the moment. At last, they would escape this hellish region into which his brother Magnus had hurled them. At last, they would continue on their road to sacred Terra.
It was an ambush.
Indeed. It was as the Macrag's Honor thrust aside the ravaged hulk of an Icono-class destroyer, and an open path to the edge of the graveyard yawned before it, that the attack came. Cries of alarm rang through the flagship's bridge as power spikes flared amidst the direlects on every side. Drifting chaos warships lit their drives on unshrouded gun decks as their internal power sources thundered to life. The Red Coursers had laid their trap with cunning and skill, guided by the precognitive powers of Kairos Fateweaver. They had hidden their ships at the far edge of the starship graveyard, precisely where Kairos foresaw the Loyalist fleet would pass through. With the careful application of cosmic hull damage, and their internal systems shrouded in minimized emission output, they had mag clamped several links of chain to their hulls and posed as just another scattering of lost void craft. Now, rumbling back to life all around the shocked loyalists, the Red Corsair ships launched an ambush of the enemy in their midst. Lance beams seared through adamantium hulls. Noble warriors who had survived countless trials were obliterated by raging firestorms or sucked helplessly out into the void. Gilliman cursed at what must surely have been further Zinchian machinations. Hemmed in and outflanked, his fleet was at a catastrophic disadvantage. Several Imperial warships attempted to break free of the starship graveyard. Their void craft were quickly targeted and, in the case of the Raven Guard frigate Silent Blade, shorn clean in two. The rest fought back, hammering fire into the void and tearing chunks from their attackers' warships at point-blank range. Chaos firepower continued to rain down upon Gilliman's fleet in a veritable storm. The Primarch saw that the foes, secure in their numerical and positional superiority, were aiming to cripple his ships rather than destroy them. Weapons batteries, aspect arrays, and engineeriums were blasted one by one, leaving the Crusade ships drifting and defenseless. Gilliman knew what must surely come next, and cursed aloud as he saw wave after wave of boarding torpedoes released from the launch decks of the attacking craft. The Red Coursers were, first and foremost, pirates. Now they sought to seal as many of the Terran Crusade warships as they could, along with the arms and armor within. Barking orders for his warriors to prepare for boarders, Gilliman's mind whirled with counter-ambush strategies and breakout plans. Defense batteries studded the mile-long flanks of McCragg's Honor. As the enemy boarding craft streaked closer, these guns roared to life, filling the void with sawing streams of firepower. Gilliman watched the external pick feeds intently, reading the patterns of destroyed foes and near misses, and determined where the enemy's forces would hit his ship the hardest. The Primarch narrowed his eyes as the vessel's primary aspect array took a direct hit, and the pick feeds drowned in sudden static. Turning away from the useless data font, Gilliman issued a calm string of orders that were circulated fleet-wide. For all those that could still hear him, the Primarch commended their remarkable courage and strength. He gave the order that all ships deploy their forces to defend their bridges, primary magazines, shield generators, and warp engines. Then, swallowing his own distaste at the religious connotations of the term, wished the Emperor's blessing upon all who were about to engage the foe. Those who repelled borders were to break free and rendezvous beyond the edge of the maelstrom as best they could. His orders issued, and Captain Sicarius, St. Celestine, and Inquisitor Greyfax at his side, Gilliman donned his helm and joined the warriors he had deployed to defend the bridge. He listened intently as Vox transmissions flew back and forth throughout the ship. Boarding torpedoes impacted by the dozens. The lower crew decks were overrun. Sergeant Astrophi's Devastator Marines held the bulkheads before the Engineerium Primus. Then came the news that a demonic creature had manifested aboard, sweeping towards the bridge at the head of a chaotic horde. Moments later, the bridge bulkheads shuddered, then exploded inwards upon the bow wave of unnatural flame. Battle was joyed as the chaos onslaught was swift and savage. It had to be, for though the Ultramarines were outnumbered, they held an incredible defensive position against the enemy boarding parties. Gilliman's Gene Sons crouched behind consoles, artfully designed to double as barricades in the event of a breach. More of their number occupied elevated positions on gantries and balconies overlooking the bulkhead, taking up positions amidst the looming grandeur of the bridge. The first servants of chaos to bound onto the bridge had absolutely no cover whatsoever. Pink horrors of Zinch were engulfed in a storm of disciplined, expertly aimed fire and ripped to pieces. Into the meat grinder poured more and more demons, while behind them squads of Red Coursers lunged through the blasted bulkhead and dashed for any cover they could find. Bolters roared, their massed echo and strobing muzzle flare rolling around the bridge like a raging thunderstorm. Demons exploded in puffs of ectoplasm. Traitor Space Marines clad in defaced liveries of a dozen chapters fell dead upon the killing ground, their armored corpses continuing to twitch and jerk as more rounds struck them. Bolt shells, plasma blasts, las beams, and missiles fell like hailstones, ripping the deck plates to blackened ruin and annihilating dozens of invaders. Inevitably, though, the boarders began to gain ground. A jetting blast of purple fire leapt out to turn a gantry to slime, sending a squad of Red Courser Terminators tumbling hundreds of Terran feet into the Vox pits below. A cluster of crack grenades rained down upon console barricades, their detonations killing one veteran and forcing two more to beat a hasty retreat. In the moments before he fell, a red courser unloaded his plasma gun into another barricade, killing several Ultramarines before being killed by his own overheated weapon exploding in his hands. See? It does happen. We've talked about how the plasma gun explodes on people, but I've never actually seen it documented, but there you go. Anyways, so it went on, the enemy eroding Gulliman's defenses through reckless assaults. Then came Kairos. The first warning the Loyalists had of the Greater Demon's onset was a thickening of the air as the warp stirred. Librarian Polinus cried out in sudden agony, hands clamped to his skull and eyes bulging as the energies of his own mind were turned against him. Fast as lightning, Gilliman hurled himself aside, shoving Captain Sicarius clear in the instant before Polinus's body detonated in a wave of blue fire. Several Ultramarines were not so lucky, though, their armor dissolving and the flesh turned to ash as flames washed over them. As the commanders of the Ultramarines reeled, the next rate of firepower to fall upon the kill box was transmogrified. Instead of a mass reactive shells and whistling grenades, all that struck the attacking hordes was shimmering starlight and wisps of silver steam. A fresh wave of leaping flamers and cackling horrors surged through the bulkhead and leapt to the attack. More red coursers came with them, lumbering chaos terminators and fanged-helmed warriors with bolters blazing. At their back, his ragged wings spread wide and his staff tapping before him, came Kairos Fate Weaver himself. Seeing the Lord of Change, Gilliman roared a battle cry and charged. Cato Sicarius and his warriors followed close on the Primarch's heels, while Greyfax and Celestine hurled themselves into the foe to either side. Gilliman stormed through the demons and traitors alike, his flaming sword the color of doom, while volley after volley of shells thundered from the hand of Dominion. Demons exploded in sprays of unnatural ichor before Gilliman's fury, while those traitors foolish enough to stand in his path were smashed aside like rag dolls. Following the trail of carnage wrought by the Primarch, Sicarius and his battle brothers were in close pursuit, hacking and blasting any enemies who tried to encircle Gilliman. Sicarius himself was a blur, his Talisarian Tempest blade, drawing golden arcs through the air as it lopped horned helms from armored shoulders and split demons in two. At the same time, blinding light shone from St. Celestine as she carved her way through the warp spawn, and Inquisitor Greyfax was there as well. It did not take Kairos's matchless future sight to foresee that his enemy would attempt to reach and slay him. The Lord of Change was no match for Gilliman in battle, but he had long prepared for this moment. Now, as Gilliman smashed his way closer, Kairos set his devious scheme in motion by unleashing a pulse of blue flame from his staff. 9 heralds of Zinch had worked their way through the press of battle, concealed behind shimmering spells of illusion. At Kairos' signal, the leering demons cast aside their sorcerer's shrouds and began a babbling incantation. Bolt shells whipped in towards the heralds the moment they appeared, but their demon minions willingly leapt into the path of the shots. The heralds continued their chant, 9 voices rolling, 9 voices crying with each other over the cacophony of battle. Raising the staff of tomorrow high above his heads, Kairos joined his croaking voices to the burgeoning spell. Since Gilman had first entered the maelstrom and begun to hear Kairos whispering in his mind, the greater demon had been planting traps in the Primarch's subconscious. It had not been easy, for Gilman's mind was a pristine fortress of order and rationality, and his mental defenses were formidable. Yet, slowly, carefully, the deed had been done. Kairos had teased forth Gilliman's guilt, his anger and disappointment at what remained of the Imperium, his fears for its future. The demon had intended to continue his work until the Primarch was quite mad before attempting this ritual, but the intervention of the interfering Eldar had forced Kairos' hand. His preparations would have to be enough, or else Gilliman would surely banish him back to the warp and escape. Swaying and gibbering, spinning and leaping, the demons worked their spell and dragged forth the incantations laced within Gilliman's mind. The Primarch stumbled, bellowing in pain as streamers of incandescent energy poured from his eyes and open mouth. Squirming tendrils of green, psychic guilt twinned around serpent streamers of disgust and surging red tendrils of anger. Engulfed by the whirling storm of psychic energies, Gilman tried again to forge a path forward, but with a howl of pain he went down on one knee. Greyfax, bogged down in the morass of combat, could only watch helplessly while Celestine attempted to fly to the Primarch's aid, was thwarted as several demons latched onto her wings. Sicarius and his battle brothers, crying out in impotent fury, tried to cut their way through the foe, hoping to stop the incantation in any way they could. The second company captain ordered all fire concentrated upon the demons tormenting the Primarch. It did no good. Those shots aimed at Karos puffed away as clouds of glittering dust, while the heralds remained shielded behind squirming bulwarks of demonic flesh. Though the outnumbered Ultramarines fought furiously, they could not reach the demonic source to stop the ritual. Yet the Lord of Ultramar was not done. Roaring, Gilliman surged to his feet once more, hammering off a volley of shells that struck Karos Fateweaver and ripped bloody chunks from his gaunt torso. The demon was wounded sorely by the explosive impacts, yet his chant did not stop. Instead, it redoubled in intensity, the demon's voice ringing out cruel and cold. Whirling and lashing, the colored streamers of ectoplasmic energy surged from the Primarch's mind. All of Gilliman's negative emotions, all of the threads of madness and wrath and fear that Karos had seeded into his mind, blossomed forth and wrapped themselves like vines around the Primarch. They thickened and twisted, pulsing with power as they hardened to heavy crystal chains. Arms and legs bound tight, Gilliman crashed to his knees once more. This time, held firmly in Karos' spell, he was unable to rise. The Oracle, projecting his voice to every warrior upon the bridge, commanded the Ultramarines, the living saint, and the Inquisitor to lay down their arms at once. If they did not, the Primarch would be crushed and throttled to death before their eyes. One by one, the guns fell silent as the horrified Ultramarines complied. The battle was over, and Karos Fateweaver stood gloating and victorious. This was the end of the Terran Crusade, and on that sad note, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this Vox, please like.
Sector, that's not funny.
I thought it was, but unfortunately, we are out of time.
But what about Gilliman's grand escape, his battle with his brother Magnus, and most importantly, Cypher rescuing him?
Well, that we will have to leave for next week. But like I said, to those listening...
Wait!
What?
We were supposed to start the year off with Armageddon. We can't leave off this year with the cliffhanger.
Why not?
Good point.
But for those listening, we will be pulling double duty. Next Wednesday, we will be releasing our first Vox on Armageddon, and on Saturday, we will try to finish the Terran Crusade.
That's a good plan, Zekdar. But until then, Happy New Year. We'll see y'all in the next year.
Huzzah! And if you did like this Vox, please like, follow, and of course, subscribe. And as always, I hope you had a wonderful year. And until next time, this is Vector.
And you.
Signing off.